Welcome back to another Homes on Homes podcast. We are live at a crazy busy Improve Center. And you know what? Remember 2 years ago, I had two great guys in, and we were on my property cleaning up my pond because of this overgrowth of cattails, whatever you want to call those green things that come up with the brown top. I call them cattails. Since then, it has actually come back. So I have brought back Joe and Nick DeMarco from WeedsBGone, and we've already had a subject about this, and it's going in a direction that I think everyone needs to hear. Joe, Nick, great to see you, man.
Good to see you,
Nice
too.
to see you, Mike.
So my cattails are coming back, and they really started late last year, and I'm going to explain why. My belief. The water was low all year. I don't think we had a lot of rain, and because the water was low in the pond, it really got stagnant, and they started growing again. So I'm starting to think about this going, okay, is this the reason because last year, or the possibility that we are just not getting enough rainwater? Well, this spring, we're getting a crap load of rainwater. My pond is full, and the cattails are really starting to grow again. So I want to get into this subject because in my mind, I started to think about storm water management. Natural waterways are just from heavy raining and creating a flood control system of where the water is going to go. And that's how over the billions of years on this planet, we've created rivers, etc. I live around farms. The water's going through, coming in, goes through my pond, continues down, ends up going down somewhere to Lake Ontario. By in the long run, that's where it ends up going because they all join together, get to the Rouge River, etc., other rivers that hit Lake Ontario. I don't think the solution is just coming back and again raking it again. I think I need to go into a different direction. What do you think that is?
So, Mike, what happens was, like you said, with the farm runoff, it's all the nutrients that's coming through the water, gets absorbed through pesticides that they use. They use a lot of stuff to keep their plants healthy and growing strong. A lot of the times when it rains, a lot of that will get absorbed into the water and go in through the pond, and then internally it gets absorbed into the sediments. So inside the ponds, you're getting an overloading of nutrients, which is feeding the weeds every year.
When you say nutrients, you're talking about farmland nutrients like they would put in for growing corn,
right.
etc.?
Yeah, to keep their plants healthy, they'll use those, and then they also use their manure in the springs, which is, you got a lot of bacteria in there, very rich in nutrients as well. So what they're using to keep their plants healthy and alive is getting absorbed in the water column. So when that water runs through the rivers and goes through certain ponds, it's called external loading. So externally, the ponds are getting loaded up with nutrients through the water quality itself.
So when I hear nutrients, I think about this, and the nutrients are coming off the farmland, coming into my pond. Wouldn't that be healthy for my pond?
So it depends on what kind of nutrients you're looking at. So the fertilizers from the farms, is meant for plant growth. So by getting lots of nutrients, there's different types of bacteria that you can get from plant growth. So there's anaerobic bacteria and aerobic bacteria that builds up in the bottoms of ponds. And what happens is as a pond gets left unmaintained, it will load up with nutrients. So there's different stages of ponds. So the first stage of a pond would be right when it gets dug out. You're going to have clean water, very low plant life. There's going to be, you're going to have clean and clear water. There's not a lot of nutrient load in the pond. As the years go on of the weeds, so what will happen is leaves will start to fall in the ponds. You'll get, you'll get wildlife that come in. They start to, use the pond. You get a lot of bacteria that builds up from what they leave behind from eating the plants and so on. That's what starts to fill in the bottom of these ponds, which gets a lot of nutrients that builds up. So once you start getting the growth in these ponds, normally happens about 2 or 3 years of unmaintaining a pond, you'll start to see your cattails starting to pop up. You'll start to see some vegetation growing in the bottom of the pond, which is, if left unmaintained over the winter months, these plants will die in these ponds. As the plants die in the pond, you're going to get what's called organic matter.
So it breaks down, it's sitting on the bottom.
That's right, just like your compost. So you have compost piles, you put your banana peels and your oranges into the compost, and it internally loads up with nutrients. So it's called internal loading. So externally, it gets nutrients from the farmlands, leaves and everything that's falling into these ponds. And internally, as that stuff settles on the bottom, so over the winter, as the weeds will rot, it's called turnover. So as the water gets colder at the top, the water from the bottom starts to mix with the top water, and you're getting the unoxygenated water from the bottom mixing in with the top water. That's when you can start to see fish kills, start to see overloaded algae blooms will start to come around as in the springs. So the bottom
Is
nutrients,
that the water turning green?
that's right.
Yeah.
So when the water starts to turn green, it's from the nutrients from the bottom getting released and it's coming up. So algae blooms are very harmful to not only humans, it's also harmful to pets and also the ecosystem as well. So as the ponds get left unmaintained, they start to die off. There's a certain process, or a certain terminology, it's called eutrophication. As the pond gets left alone with no maintenance, the pond starts to die.
So, we have a dog next door, great little dog, and it's actually not a little dog, it's a big dog, and every chance she can, she goes ripping onto my property, dives into the pond.
Right.
She loves the pond. She's a freak for jumping in there. You're telling me this wouldn't be good for the dog, is that right?
So if there's the wrong type of algae in this pond, so over time, if the algae becomes blue-green, it's toxic to pets and humans. So it's actually very, very bad for the dogs to be using this water or the pond or waterfront property. If it starts to consume that water that's in this pond, it's actually toxic, this algae.
Okay, so now you've just opened up my imagination. I've got a lot of questions, but before I go in that direction, what I'm hearing from you, I need to oxygenate my pond. Is that it?
Absolutely. So what happens is you can cut and clean till the cows come home. However, by putting some oxygen in and treating with beneficial bacteria and enzymes is where you're going to be able to control your pond. So ponds without any help, they just become a mess. They become mosquito draws, and you need water movement, you need oxygen, and once we clean it, like we cleaned yours last time, what we need to do there is put some kind of oxygen into that pond. And by doing that, now you can actually maintain it. And
so it's not just the bags you put in, because we put in a bag of stuff that all I know it's a bag of stuff.
Right.
You dropped in a big bag, it was an expensive bag, and that was supposed to help do what?
go ahead.
So it reduces the muck levels at the bottom. So what gets left behind from the weeds that rot and everything over the winter, you get sediment that builds up, which is very rich in nutrients. So these treatments that we put into the ponds, beneficial bacteria and enzymes, sometimes we'll use pond dye to block the sunlight from getting down to the bottom, but they need a lot of oxygen to survive. So it's called aerobic bacteria. Anaerobic bacteria is what's building up in your pond right now. So there's a thermocline in the water. So at the bottom of these ponds, it's anoxic. There's not a lot of oxygen. So when stuff's rotting at the bottom, it's anaerobic bacteria starts to build up. So this bacteria is very bad for the ecosystem if it's left unmaintained for so long. So what we do with the oxygenated water is we'll eliminate anaerobic bacteria by oxygenating the bottom of the pond.
So you're talking just like a fish tank. Let's think about
That's
this.
right.
If a fish tank goes untreated, the bubbles aren't going in the water.
Exactly.
The fish tank goes green, the fish die, and we're left with a stinky smell.
Right.
I had a fish tank once.
Yep.
I don't
Yeah.
ever want it again. It was a pain in my rear.
That's right. So that's how I explain it, Mike, all the time. Is so for an easy way of explaining the situation, if you got a fish tank, there's a reason why there's a little bubbler in the bottom of the fish tank, and the treatments that you will put in the fish tank are keeping the bacteria levels down, and it's also keeping the water clean and clear, so it's not getting algae, because the algae is actually harmful to some fish and wildlife as well. So just like a fish tank, you need to oxygenate the bottom, circulating the water, and what it also does is it breaks the thermocline. So thermocline is, have you ever been swimming in a lake and you go past this thing?
I got my diver's license.
So they explain
when I
it
went down, I
sometimes,
got
they
down
say-
to the cold zone.
And what they'll say is, oh, wow, I just hit a cold spring. So it's often mistaken as a spring, but normally it's the thermocline. Anything underneath that water is unoxygenated water. You're going to get the anaerobic bacteria at the bottom. So anything above that is actually normally pretty healthy water. Normally you got a lot of oxygen in the top water due to movement of the waves. You get your boats that come through. But once you get down to the bottom of these ponds, or in lakes, you know, you get that bad bacteria. So when stuff rots at the bottom of the ponds, you get methane gas, hydrogen sulfide, which is built up in the muck. So
that's Mother Nature.
It's called internal loading. This gas is building up from the rotting process in the bottom. And we eliminate these gases by oxygenating the bottom of the ponds and lakes. And we eliminate what's called anaerobic bacteria, and we introduce these engineered enzymes and beneficial bacteria that eats the muck from the bottom of these ponds and lakes, that keeps the muck levels down and keeps the nutrient level at a medium. So you need to have a proper balance in your pond, in your lakes, just like you have in your pools and in your fish tanks. So you got a pool, you got water in it, you got no pump and you got no movement, the water's gonna go green and the water's not gonna be clear. Same thing in your fish tank. So everything in the world needs to be maintained. Most of the time people will dig a pond and they pretty much get left for death when there's no aeration system. If there's no fountain, if there's no movement in that water, it's stagnant. Bad bacteria will start to build up over the years of not maintaining that pond.
See, this is really logical to me, and we're gonna solve the problems with my pond, but it's not just the pond, because this has opened up my mind big time. I'll finish the pond. It's not just the chemicals we need to put in the bottom to clear the buildup of debris on the bottom to help make that disappear. It's the oxygenation.
They're not chemicals.
That's right. So one thing I always say is it's not a chemical. It's a beneficial bacteria and enzyme that we're putting in. It's a treatment.
You're putting in a bacteria.
So it's a live. It's engineered. It's called beneficial bacteria and enzymes that we use. So different types of treatments treat different types of problems. So you know, if you got overloading of nutrients, there's a certain product that we use. It's called Clean and Clear. It helps keep the balance at a happy medium and help keep the your algae levels down. I have these pellets and pucks that we put in that actually physically consume the rotting materials at the bottoms of lakes and ponds. So technically all the problems are coming from the runoff coming into your lake or pond, and it's also coming from what your ponds or lakes are constructed out of as well. So if there's a lot of nutrients in that soil itself, will also determine what kind of weed growth you're getting. And the cattails are a lot of the time from the sides of the ponds are getting a lot of sunlight. So when you're getting the sunlight, it's penetrating down and you're getting a lot of nutrients in that water, and that's when you're gonna get your cattails starting to grow up along the edges of the pond. In the deeper water, you don't normally see that type of growth. So you're getting a lot of sunlight in the shallower water. So over the years of ponds not getting maintained, the water gets shallower. More sunlight gets down to the bottom, more nutrients will build up, and then every year that stuff's rotting, you're getting more muck levels and you're losing your pond, just like what's happening at your place.
There's a place in Georgetown by me.
Yep.
That every time I drive by, there are so much cattails, you can't even see the water anymore.
Yep.
It used to be a beautiful sight. The bridge goes over it. It was beautiful.
Right.
And now it is so ugly. And I'm thinking, this is what's happening to my house. So it's not, is it just as simple if I run? Now, I know that, Joe, you said I need to run an electrical line that's about 1,000 feet away from my house. How am I gonna do that? I'm gonna have to run an 8-gauge line. I'm gonna put it on a 25 amp breaker to supply 110 power to the pond to get a fountain in. Can I just oxygenate the water with a fountain?
Well, it will work. However, you're not getting the oxygen down to the bottom. Okay, so it will put some oxygen in, but what you want to do is you want to get down to the bottom. We have things called top aerators as well, which is better than a fountain, and it'll keep that water moving for one. And we have solar units where you can actually run solar with these top aerators.
So I don't have to worry about electrical anymore?
No.
We can do solar?
Yeah, we can do solar.
Okay, so I bought one of those big turbines.
Windmills? Yeah.
You know,
Yep.
with, I don't know, it was $7,500. I don't know if I got ripped off or not. The idea was they put in 2 aerators at the bottom of my pond.
Right.
And as the wind blows this thing, it's supposed to bubble from the
Diffusers,
bottom.
right.
But it's not doing it enough.
You don't have enough air going through those diffusers, right?
There's not enough oxygen, so there's not enough oxygen coming out of the diffusers, and what we have is called continuous laminar flow aeration, so we're continuously oxygenating the bottom. So with your unit, you're only getting oxygen when the wind's blowing. So if
Like solar, it only works when the sun's out.
So with
Right.
solar, so there's actually a battery powered bank So it runs on battery as well. So there's a battery pack which charges the batteries over the day, and so there's a way to cycle
For 24
solar to
hours.
battery to the unit, and to go back and
Like
forth.
my garage.
That's right. So we're utilizing solar and battery power where there's places that has no power. So when it comes down to using your treatments, and you're asking, if I just put a fountain in, what would happen? Fountains are very aesthetic. It's mostly for aesthetics. You're not getting a lot of oxygen to the bottom. If I'm going to use treatments, the treatments that I use are going to treat the bottom of the pond. If you're going past that thermocline and it's going down to the bottom of the lake or pond, these treatments are going to die off very fast if there's not enough oxygen down at the bottom. So if you're using a product like these pellets and pucks, if they go down and they're trying to eat the muck, there's a lot of like gases, like I explained before. The gases that are at the bottom will kill off the enzyme or the treatments very fast. So by having the oxygen at the bottom makes a healthy environment for this aerobic bacteria to become a live organism and start eating the materials and start dealing with the problem at the bottom of the
So
pond.
we can solve the issue in my pond. Well, right away I'm thinking this could be a big problem because a lot of the ponds everywhere are not being treated, are not
exactly.
being taken care of, like a fish tank, like your pool.
That's right.
And these are areas where water's flowing from winter snow melt,
Yep.
rain, and I know they're going to end up in the lake. So you kept saying lake. Last year, when I was on my boat, everyone was talking about the growth in the water of these humongous, I don't know, weeds underwater.
Yep.
And everyone was complaining their boats were picking it up, and they were
Yep.
talking to the harbor master saying, we've never seen this growth like this before. What's going on? And they didn't have an answer to that. Is it because the water runoff is taking the nutrients, this is what I'm getting from you, and actually getting to the lake and now affecting the lakes?
So that is that has a big player in the game of what's feeding the nutrients from that water is feeding the weed growth. But technically what's going on in the lakes is there's a lot of invasive weeds that have come over from overseas. So boats will carry this on their propellers. You'll get birds will start to bring it in. They eat the weeds and so on, and it gets left behind. And seeds and fragments of these weeds have landed in the Trent Severn waterways and the Rideau Canal, which is taking over the bottom of the lake, and they're very, very invasive. So as you drive your boat through these weeds, they start to spread.
Yeah, they get chopped up
They
in the
get
props,
chopped up.
and it just spreads the seed.
So they float around, and then they can actually go to the bottom. Once they sit floating around for a while, they'll go to the bottom and they'll regrow. So there's a couple different types of weeds that are in the lakes now. It's called milfoil, Eurasian milfoil.
And that was the easy one. Excuse me, sorry. So milfoil was the one that was only around before, okay, which is pretty much everywhere, okay? And that was easy to maintain. I mean, they were even using Reward to spray it. And what that did, it just kills the weeds.
And who's they? The government?
No, different companies are out there that
your
spray.
lake associations will start to use stuff like that.
They're still using it.
So they still use chemical applications. So what happens with a chemical application? So for this product, for this weed, it's called Eurasian milfoil. There's a product that they put into the water. It's simply a spray. It's a chemical. The chemicals kill the weeds. The weeds now go down to the bottom, and they turn into rotting materials.
That's right. So more fertilizer.
So what's happening is they're dealing with the problem, not
not for the future.
That's right.
Exactly. So they're not dealing with why the problem is happening. They're dealing with the actual problem itself. So it's, what is the cause of the problem? The cause of the problem is lack of maintaining the actual vegetation, overloading of nutrients, and actually, so chemicals are a cheap solution to get rid of the problem quickly, but it's never going to go away using a chemical
It's
application.
a quick fix.
It's a Band-Aid, we call
Yeah.
it, for weed growth.
Okay. Canada has probably the most amount of fresh water in the world in the lakes that we have here in Ontario. We know that the United States gets half the lakes, Canada gets the other half of the lakes. That's our drinking water. That's also where we dump all that crap that everyone uses in their toilets.
Yep.
And not to mention, these are things that I know, that the lakes are now full. The number one chemical they're finding, which I didn't even know about what you're talking about, Joe, but the number one thing they're finding in the lakes right now, and the government doesn't want to talk about, is Tylenol. Because we're consuming Tylenol. Oh, honey,
Right.
I got a headache. We go pee, we pee out what our body doesn't use. That water gets flushed, goes through the treatment plant, and ends up in the lakes.
Right.
So this is a continuation of more people, more crap, more toilets, more flush, more going to the lake. You're telling me that on top of all of this, we're now getting too much nutrients into the lake that's growing more weeds. What does this say for the future of water in our lakes?
We got a big problem. I mean, I've been doing this for almost 30 years. And what we're seeing now, you can't even put your feet in the water. The fish are dying. You can't even, there's no oxygen for the fish, let alone let my dog in there or go swimming in these places, right? And it is a huge problem.
I'm gonna tell you something.
And now it's not just the milfoil. You've got something called stony storewort.
It's called starry stonewort.
Right.
Starry
stonewort, and it's actually an algae. So milfoil was
that was easy to take care
was our
of.
first problem. Okay, so when we had milfoil, my dad and I used to go out on a little tin boat. We'd cut the weeds. They'd float to the top.
And then
we'd go basket them all up. You have to pick up all your cuttings, okay? You want to make sure you pick up all the cuttings so the weeds don't float away somewhere else and start to regrow. When you cut milfoil, it spreads like crazy. So people have to deal with the problems. I want to go swimming in my waterfront. Then we designed some of these mats that you can put down at the bottom of the lake that blocks the sunlight from hitting the weeds, but you can only do such a small area with things like that. So now we have these.
Let's go back to the starry stonewort.
So now we have the invasive weeds that are much more different to maintain. So if you try to cut these weeds, they sink to the bottom.
More fertilizer.
So it's very hard to get this type of material out of the lakes and ponds because it's so heavy, and it's actually an algae.
You're talking small ponds and small lakes. What about Lake Ontario, Lake Erie,
Lake
Georgian Bay?
Yeah, everywhere.
So Lake Ontario, in the marinas of Lake Ontario, they have these weeds there present right now.
Right.
I deal with Canadian Air Force Base, CFB Trenton. They have a very big problem with starry stonewort. So we used to just harvest these weeds. You harvest the weeds, they grow back. You cut them, they grow back. So we came up with, we started doing aeration systems with treatments, and we're actually getting rid of the nutrients not only in the muck, in the actual water column itself. So the new weeds are actually based on the nutrients in the water because it's actually an algae. It's a plant-looking material, but it's actually an algae. So it's called Chara, Cara. People call it different names. It's called Chara, Cara, and starry stonewort is in the same family, which is now taking over the Chara. So what's happening is it's matting the bottoms of the lakes.
Right.
The Great Lakes.
The Great Lakes, ponds, everywhere.
All the lakes.
So pretty much every body of water has the opportunity of this coming in through either birds bringing them in, rivers coming through people's ponds,
and boats.
Right.
Big boats.
We're seeing more and more of these weeds everywhere now.
And what we started seeing too, Mike, is that where we started working on that was the first time we ever did the work back in the day, was on the Trent Sever waterways, and they are totally full of weeds, pretty much all the lakes. Okay, so I get a lot of questions asking me, I'm looking for a cottage. I said, well, you want to find something with deep water and rock. So the shallower the water, the more issues you have. And in through Apsley, Halliburton, Lake Rosso, and that, it wasn't really an issue before. And now we're starting to see it spread all in through all those clean lakes. And they were everywhere. It's everywhere.
Is the government contacting you about this?
No,
you know what? The government does it. They'd rather have it all turn into swamps.
So what happened?
They want nothing to do with it, is what I think.
No.
So the Trent Sever waterways and everyone, they're very worried about water levels and treating, having the proper water levels, because if that gets messed up, so the lift lock system through at the Trent is managed so pristinely, because if the water levels go up too much and too low, flooding. Now you're getting a lot of runoff that's coming in, and so a lot of the problems they're dealing with is people's homes getting flooded out and so on. So now what's happening is, after the years of being unmaintained, it's now the problem has arisen so much now that you're getting weeds in water where you didn't have it before. And I'll tell you why it's happening, Mike, because every year when you lose depth, you now have shallower water. So people I get customers that'll call me all the time. I had 10 feet of water when I moved in here 15, 20 years ago. Now I only got 7 feet of water. What's going on, Nick? I said, well, every year you don't manage these weeds. They're dying off over the winter, and they're turning into rotting materials at the bottom of the lake. And now you're losing depths, and then we had another problem.
So you're saying it's really not going down. The bottom's
That's
coming
correct.
up.
Full of
So
silt.
you're not losing yeah. So and it's all rotting material. So it's
Right.
the most nutrient-rich material you can get on this planet. So
I
what's
could bag
happening?
that and sell it.
So what's happening
As
is
fertilizer.
Is internally this your compost pile is so rich in nutrients from your banana peels and your orange peels and so on. And that's just from that breaking down over 1 or 2 years. This muck has been internally loading up and breaking down in the bottom of the lake. Some places 20 years, some places 50 years worth of organic matter is still at the bottom of the lake feeding the weeds. So how I explain it is a standard operating procedure only gets implemented when something happens.
So, I think of history because you went back 50 years. How about we go back 100 years or 1,000 years? Let's go back 100 years. The population wasn't so big. We didn't have a lot of farming in comparison to what we do today because we're feeding more mouths. We didn't have to worry about toilets being flushed and going to the lake. The more population, first speculation in population is that we are killing the environment. We are causing all of the off-gassing that's going into the atmosphere. We're changing the heat, but it's the sun that is already hot. Well, we are affecting, mankind is affecting the weather. We're not just affecting the weather because now the population has grown and we do have more flushing toilets. We do have more nutrients from the farms that are really farming to try and feed all the people, especially in Ontario, never mind Canada, never mind the United States. I'm getting this to the point that this is creating more problems than we even know about. Because if it's affecting the 5 Great Lakes that we have around here, it's going to affect our drinking water. It's going to affect the future. To your knowledge, is this going to affect drinking water?
Absolutely. No water, no life. Well, there's a serious problem. I mean, even now you're talking about the Great Lakes. You look at all the inland lakes and all the septic systems, okay? And believe me, they're not 100%.
We're adding more and more.
We're adding more and
corruption
more
to
to the lakes.
What's a way of helping to solve this, to your knowledge?
Well, with what we're doing through aeration, and it's got to be maintained. So, for instance, I've got a colleague in the U.S. that does aeration. That's how I got onto it, through my uncle, anyways. And the government they're taking on. They're running miles and miles of airline through the lakes and putting diffusers in.
At the bottom.
At the bottom. So they're running almost 1 kilometer to 2 kilometers of self-sinking airline for one diffuser. Okay, so like if you got to go out, so
a million feet of airline.
The amount of oxygen that we're putting off with one diffuser. So it's not just creating a bubble. So it's called dissolved oxygen. So if you have to use a proper diffuser to get the oxygen dissolved into the water. So once your DOs are up, not only at the top of the water, at the bottom of the water column as well. So what happens is once we break that thermocline, we make the temperatures from the bottom to the top are actually very similar, opposed to when you have the thermocline, you go down to the bottom, the water temperature is significantly different than the top. So what we're talking about is so with doing aeration, with your treatments and getting the proper treatments for the proper problems, we have capabilities of cleaning up wastewater retention ponds, lakes, small ponds, big ponds, 500-acre lakes we work on in some cases. So this company that we've teamed up with, it's called Clean Flow International.
Everblue Lakes now, yeah.
Everblue Lakes and Clean Flow International. They've been around since 1970, aerating lakes and ponds and reservoirs, bringing them back to their natural, what they were once before.
Is this just as easy to think about? Because I think about everything as the veins, right? And the veins would be the creeks, the streams, the rivers that feed the lakes. What if we were to treat all of those? Does that help treat the lake?
Okay, so what we do, Mike, is we put, like in the small creeks going into the lakes, what we'll do, and you'll notice where those creeks are coming in, you'll notice a lot of weeds and lily pads in that area, and algae in that area. So what we do is we'll put nutrient sponges in those creeks, which filters the water before it hits the lake. And that definitely makes a difference.
So they're called nutrient sponges. So we can, depending on how much water flow you're getting, these sponges absorb phosphorus and nitrogen, and they hold them in this sack. So it's called. So what's happening is your nutrients, phosphorus, nitrogen, and all that from your fertilizers gets absorbed into the water. And once that water hits the lake where there's a lot of sunlight, that's when you're going to start to get your algae blooms and so on. So in Lake Ontario, a few years back, we had blue-green algae warnings at all the beaches. You can't go in the water because it's toxic to humans.
We had blue-green algae warnings?
Yes, in Lake Ontario, and
Lake
also
Huron, everywhere.
also Lake Huron, and also in the Trent Severn waterways, on Pigeon Lake, Buckhorn Lake, and Shamong Lake, there was a no swimming warning saying, you cannot go in the water. This blue-green algae is toxic, and that's due to overloading of your nutrients from runoff. So if you're getting a lot of water coming in from everywhere else, and also a big factor on this too is old septic systems that are on the lakes. So for example,
old septic systems that are on the lakes.
So people who have the cottage, they got a septic tank that's been around since 1950.
And they're literally, the weeping is right at the lake.
The weeping's right at the lake. So what happens over time is they start to leach into the water, okay? So now you're getting bad bacteria, you're getting fecal bacteria.
Well, this is what I'm used to as a kid. I mean, you guys, when you were kids, we used to go down to the beach and swim at the beach, and all of a sudden there's a flag up there that says, no swimming due to what? Wasn't the blue-green thing you were talking about. It was...
I think it was bad bacteria from fecal matter, from human...
And what do you call that?
I'm trying to think of the word...
Salmonella.
No. I'll find it for you shortly.
Okay, so you had the signs out there, don't swim in the water because it's contaminated, it's bacteria, it's literally corrupt from all the toilets. That's what it was. Today we still got more toilets, so we have that. Last year, one of my friends, he's an older guy that, we love him. We call him the Doc Father. He's an Italian guy. Loses his glasses in the water.
Yep.
I got a bunch of kids that come over and we just start talking. They just happen to come over and say hi. I said, you know what? I don't want to dive down there because I don't want to do that anymore. I just didn't feel like it. Yeah. It's about 12 feet deep. I give you $50 if you can dive in the water and find Al's glasses. Guy goes, $50? You'll give me $50? I said, yes. So he dives in the water, and I'm not kidding you. This was last year. He dives in the water, he goes underwater, he opens up his eyes, he comes up the first time because he's out of breath, right? He's got to go 12 feet down. He says, I can't see them, it's really murky down there, and I'm really trying. I said, $50, $50. He goes down again. 3 times he goes down. He finds the glasses, and when he comes up, I give him the $50. His eyes are bloodshot red.
Yep.
I looked at him and I went, oh my God, what did I do? Did I send him down there? Why were his eyes bloodshot red? I'm thinking this water is contaminated. And that's what they call it. The water's contaminated. They don't want to tell you what's in it. I'm thinking, I shouldn't have asked him to do that. I'm telling everyone, don't jump in the lake here.
That's right.
We got to do it in the middle of the lake where the water's cleaner.
So we've actually done projects where people, what was that place?
So there's a place called Cobden Beach, okay? So they actually had a big bacteria problem. So their filtration plant was right there. So that's where everything from the whole town, everything got filtered through that one station. And right where it was going back into the water, it was very rich, high in phosphorus. And what happens is once that phosphorus-rich water gets sunlight, you get algae blooms. They had blue-green algae warning, can't swim at the beach. So we went in, we installed...
So when you say the blue-green...
Blue-green is toxic. So
that's toxic.
There's algae, there's filamentous algae, there's different types of algae, but blue-green is, once it becomes to a certain stage, it's toxic to humans and pets. So they had this problem, their beach was shut down, and within installing our aeration system, within one season, the next season after, we installed it, the beach was closed at June. The next season, it was open till the end of August, using aeration with our beneficial bacteria and enzymes.
Right. So you actually helped it.
So we helped cure the water, and not only are we curing the actual water, we're curing the muck at the bottom. So we get a problem in our lakes where you can get what's called swimmer's itch. So that's from it's actually a parasite that's in the sediment that can't live in the human body. But when it tries to get into your body, it becomes very, very itchy. So they call it swimmer's itch. And it's due to the bacteria in the actual sediments of the lakes and ponds. So my crew's got it several times. I always wear my wetsuit when I'm in the water because I know that this is a serious problem, and it's called swimmer's itch. So something that you can get just from doing what you're doing. Once you start to stir up that muck in the bottom of the lake, that's when you get this bad bacteria starting to come up into the water column as well. So,
I got a flashback to my dad. We used to live very close to the Don River. And my dad would talk about all the time that him and his buddies and the girls, they go down to the Don River and swim in the Don River. And that was the heyday. And before, I was born, he goes, man, they shut that down real fast
Right.
because that was the channel to carry all
Everything.
Mother Nature
Yeah.
That's
and
right.
what we put down the toilet.
Right.
People were getting sick. You talk about this itch. We now know no one goes in the Don River. That
Right.
Don River is
Yeah.
the leachway
Yeah.
that leads into Lake Ontario, and they're trying to stay on top of it. Something tells me you guys are busier than you've ever been in your life.
We
Joe?
are, and you wait till after this year because of the low temperatures and no ice, very little ice, and it's going to be a bad year.
So the water needs to freeze, is what you're telling me.
Yeah, if it freezes, if the longer it's frozen, eh, Nick?
So you're blocking more sunlight over the
Right.
winter. Okay, so also your water levels are very due to how much ice you have. So a lot of times lakes will drain a lot of their waters. Okay, so if you don't have a lot of ice, so I'll tell you what happened at my cottage. We only had 6 to 7 inches of ice in some spots where you normally have 12 inches of ice. Okay, what happens is once that water melts, that's what's giving these lakes more water. So if you don't have a good ice freeze and you drain that lake out of water, and then after the spring, you can't just pump water into these lakes.
Right.
The reason why they're draining the lakes is because if the ice melts and all that water that's underneath it, with the ice melt, you're going to start getting flooded out. You're going to start having water that needs to go somewhere. I don't know if you remember the other year, Lake Ontario was very, very high in water because they weren't able to dump it out into so in areas where you need to maintain this water.
Well, they were flooded everywhere.
Everywhere
Yeah,
was
yeah.
flooded.
Everywhere.
So what happens if they were to start dumping that water into the Trent, because they would start to flood at homes and lots of money would be on the line. So why they say the ice is so important is because you need that water in the spring to fill these lakes back up. And
This is what you're saying, Joe, is the future isn't looking good because this is just the beginning of what's really to come.
Oh yeah.
that's right.
We're seeing less freezing of the lakes,
Yes.
warmer temperatures in the winter, more added people, so more added crap to the lake. I keep saying crap, think about it. We all sit on the toilet in the morning. All that's going to the lake. Now we've got so much more nutrients from the farms, the water runoff. This weather that's slowly changing, and Mother Nature
It
has
is, for
been
sure.
changing for billions of years anyways. It's not just us. We're not helping it. This is going to be a serious problem. So here's what I'm seeing. Invest in water because it's going to be worth more than gas real soon.
That's right.
So
No
one thing
water, no life.
One thing he always told me that back in the day. He goes, water's the most important thing in the world, and I said to myself, funny, we have the most freshwater lakes in the world with zero maintenance. So I thought to myself, what do you know in the world that doesn't get maintained? Okay, you got governments that own the forest, they're planting trees for more oxygen, they're doing all the stuff. There's not a lot of money going into lake management, and the reason why I think this is happening is nothing really gets paid attention to until something happens. So now that we're 50 years into these weeds rotting, the muck levels are so high now the weeds are actually starting to come to the surface, or they're actually starting to grow because the water levels are so high. So one problem that happened was we had zebra mussels came in, and
This was a big thing.
so zebra mussels cleaned the suspended solids out of the water, which allowed the sun to penetrate deeper.
Right.
So now the sun's penetrating to the water down at the bottom of the lake, 17 feet deep, and you're getting weeds coming right to the top of the water. Now you're getting more material breaking down at the bottom of the lake in the winters. You're getting more muck levels. So what I always said when I used to work, we always had standard operating procedures. I know when somebody got hurt, there was now a new standard operating procedure on how to deal with that problem. Now what I'm saying is people aren't seeing this problem until now it's arised right in front of their eyes. Sometimes it's too late. So in a pond, being left unmaintained so long, it's a process that calls eutrophication. If the pond dies and you don't have enough depth in water and you don't have I can't go in there and cut it and clean it and put an aeration system and cure that problem. It's too
dead.
far gone. It's too far gone. You got to actually physically excavate the material out of the bottom, start from scratch, and then install your aeration system, and then starting your treatments.
That's what a lot of people are doing. They will dredge first, and then they'll put an aeration system in to maintain it and be able to handle it. Like for instance, we do work at Lagoon City, which
I
is
know Lagoon
just
City.
by Aurelia. Well,
That used to be all swampland.
yeah.
Yes.
So we've got about 4 or 5 systems in there, and that's where they got the federal funding from. For Lagoon City, got I think maybe 80 to 100 grand from the federal government, and I think we've got four or five systems there now.
They're now
and
putting
we're
a
putting
6
2 more
yeah,
in.
yeah.
And without that, in those waters, and it's all stagnant water because they're lagoons, right? They're just pathways. And without that system in there, it would just be a total mess. And they're still harvesting their weeds. Like where they aerate, and you're not going to eliminate all the weeds. You need some weeds, okay?
But there's got to be a
So
solution.
there's good weeds and there's bad weeds.
Right.
And what's happening now in this area, so it's called, they actually have Chera and Stary stonewort in these channels. It's overtaking the bottom of the canals. So what's happening is as that stuff rots in the bottom of the canals, they only had 8 feet of water when they were started. Now they only have about 4.5 feet of water with 3 feet of muck underneath it.
So what do we do?
So what we were gonna do, they got a quote to do some dredging. So if you know Lagoon City, there's homes all the way down the whole channel. There's no access for machines or trucking material away. So we came in and we did the presentation all on aeration, and how it cleans up the lake and how it gets rid of the muck at the bottom, and also so everything we've been talking about. And actually, Environment Canada and Climate Change, they had a funding program. It was called Lake Simcoe Cleanup Fund. So we actually fell within the guidelines of the Lake Simcoe Cleanup Fund, and we were able to get federal funding. So it was $80,000 of federal funding got put towards the project, which was an aeration system. So we had a big compressor. All the sinkable tubing went to these diffusers. They're called microporous diffusers. And we oxygenated the bottom of all the canals, and we used these treatments. We are now 6 years into using treatments in these canals, and we've actually eliminated up to 2 feet of muck in a kilometer-long lagoon at a fraction of the cost of dredging. Environment Canada and Climate Change was invested in this. We also do what's called sonar image scanning, showing these muck reductions. So this is something I can show you guys eventually over after I can show you the scans that we get. And we actually got down to blue clay, where places where we had 2 feet of muck in these canals. That was the first system.
There is a solution, is what you're telling
Yes.
me.
It's just not an overnight solution, okay? So you got 50 to 100 years of stuff, or what, say Lagoon City was built 50 years ago. Now you got all that 50 years of organic matter.
That you gotta get rid of.
We're reducing it at a fraction of the cost of dredging, but it's also great for the ecosystem. So everything that I'm doing with these treatments, so the treatments eat the muck, insects eat the enzymes and beneficial bacteria that I put in, and then fish feed on the insects. So we're actually introducing one more step into
That's
this life
amazing,
cycle.
because here's something I do know is that the government doesn't like you dredging. They don't want you dredging
It's
anywhere.
very impactful in the
As a matter of
ecosystem.
fact, the dredging around the world is for the big ships. They make the
that's
canals,
right.
they
Sure.
dredge through. It's
right.
all about the ships. It's all about transportation. It's almost like they'll let go of what they're doing to Mother Nature by dredging. So this is the solution for the waterways.
Absolutely.
So depending on where the waterway is, okay? So, Mike, if you think about this, if you're in a big open water in a river, okay? If you're in a river and you got these muck and weed problems, I can't oxygenate the water and have that water contained. So depending on where you are, you don't, aeration, you're oxygenating the bottom, it's going up to the water. The dissolved oxygen is going down the stream. So depending if you're trying to treat downstream, it could be beneficial. But if you're right in that river channel, and you're trying to get rid of the muck right here, you know, it's very difficult to contain the oxygenated water and use your treatments in that area. So that's why we have other products and solutions as well. So depending on you know, what products you wanted to sell or what people wanted to use, you know, we sell a weed mat, we sell our service where we actually harvest weeds. So in the Trans-Severn waterways and the Rideau Canal, you need a permit to cut your weeds. You can't just go in and cut your weeds anywhere, okay? So
Okay, now that you're saying that, and other than the Trent and the Rideau, which they just went to a 5-year permit now, because you have to get one every year, and you can't even get them. The Trent, they are so hard to talk to or even try to deal with them. It's ridiculous.
So what's
And
happening?
meanwhile, they know there's a problem.
So
Oh, yeah.
I'll tell you why there's such a problem getting a hold of these people. So there's so many millions of cottages on these waterfront properties, and I would say probably 50 to 75% of them have weeds, and they all call one number. Could you imagine how many voicemails they got sitting on that line, right? So, and
That's a joke.
they're worried about water levels. They're worried about their shore walls are starting to break down over the years due to so on and so forth. So there's not enough attention on the weed management because it's never been a problem before. Now it's starting to take over the lakes. Now it's starting to get addressed. Some cases, so there's a lake called Shamong Lake. It's almost too far gone. It's turning into marshland. 3/4 of the lake is all swallowed up by bulrushes, cattails, and now there's the new weeds that are invasive. It's called the Phragmites. So all Lake Huron, all along the shores, this is a very, very invasive plant. It grows about 20 feet tall, okay? And when it dies off over the winter, the stem stays there, but they reseed, so another plant will grow up beside it. So you see down the side of the highway, when you go down the side of the highway, there's these big plants that are covered down. They can recede up to a kilometer away.
I don't see a very bright future with our water
No, it's
unless
bad.
we
starting-
do something.
It's something that needs to be addressed almost immediately.
Is there any internet sites that people can go to check this out? If you don't believe this, can they go anywhere?
There's all kinds of information online depending on where you're looking. Everyone has their own sources. So there's specifically for Phragmites, there's a Phragmite control program that's out there. I don't know the exact website off the top of my
We've
head.
got some
but-
on our website, WeedsBGone.com, right? So
Okay.
there's some on our website.
And if anybody's interested in getting some actual solid data, if they wanted to reach out to us, I can get you all the links to the proper places. So we're WeedsBGone.com if you guys ever wanted to go take a look at what we do and what we offer. But if you're looking for types of invasive plants, ways of dealing with these plants, regulations on where you are, we can provide that information for
There's
you.
some on our website.
And they can
Okay.
probably just Google it.
right.
Invasive
Yeah,
plants
you can,
in our lakes.
absolutely.
Yeah, and the invasive plants are specifically Eurasian milfoil. You got Chera, or they call it Cara, and you got starry stonewort. There are three main killers of the lakes right now that are taking over, and in some cases, we're losing a lot of fish population due to rotting and lack of oxygen at the bottom of the lakes as well.
This isn't looking good, and all of a sudden I'm not feeling too good about asking you guys to fix my pond. Seriously.
Well, we can make your pond
So
swimmable.
what it comes down to is in a pond, it's a little bit easier to maintain and cure.
'Cause it's a small body
it's
of water.
It's a contained body of water. It's a smaller area, and it's all about getting it at the proper level. So, just like your fish tank, okay? So if you have your fish tank, if your phosphorus levels are too high, you need to bring them down in order for other treatments to work. So there's a happy medium that you need to get in order to keep everything functioning properly.
One of our lines is we turn swamps into swimming pools.
Depending on where you are
We
and what
do.
you got.
Okay, well, I feel good about that, and I feel good about you two being on the planet right now that not only has just educated me and you, it's obviously a huge importance that we pay attention to the waters.
sir.
And I get why the government doesn't want to talk about it, because the government never wants to pay for these things, nor do they want to be blamed for it. And I would never want to be in the government.
Just like I mentioned earlier, Mike, we always fall behind. The U.S. is usually, so they're getting into doing whole lakes with aeration, which sooner or later, that's got to happen here.
And they used to chemically treat these waterways.
That's right.
So chemicals are now becoming obsolete. Chemicals are very, very, no chemical is really good for the ecosystem. So what's happening is they used to treat with
We used to go-
chemicals.
okay, so we used
and
to-
now they're using aeration with beneficial bacteria and enzymes.
So they're working on it.
they're getting there. We're starting to
Okay, so
develop,
the chemical,
right?
so we used to go to the NOMS conference. We went for, 3 or 4 years in a
Yeah,
row.
national
down
Association of
down
Lake
in the
Management.
States. Natural Lake, what is it? North
National-
American
yeah,
Lake
North
Management
America, yeah, there you go.
Association. So we used to go to those conferences, and there's a lot of chemical companies. So the chemical companies got a big say in what they're doing. So they would say aeration doesn't work.
Yeah, they'd shut us
right?
down all the time.
Yeah, they'd say aeration don't work. Aeration doesn't work. And now, look what they've gone to now. Now they're all going to aeration, right?
Good. At least we're
That's
heading in the right
that's
direction.
the answer to the future.
And the studies of using chemicals is, they say, oh, it doesn't hurt the fish. So the chemical treatments are not, it's not even about the fish. It's about what's going down at the bottom of the lakes, okay?
Well, I
and
think
rotting internally.
I think everyone's been talking about don't eat the fish from
That's
Lake
right.
Ontario
Yeah.
because it's
Yeah,
full
yeah.
of mercury.
Mercury.
We know the mercury's in the fish. What else is in
Yeah,
the fish?
yeah, exactly.
Okay, I'm getting, hey, look, I love this subject. We probably are going to have to do this again, and maybe I'll get you out to my pond and
Absolutely.
we'll talk more about this.
Sounds
Yes,
great,
I
Mike.
And solutions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, solutions for sure.
Nick, Joe, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike.
Problem.
Pay attention.
Thanks for having us.
Things are about to happen.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Very good.
This episode is brought to you by Improve Canada, Canada's largest home improvement center. Check out improvecanada.com. If you like the show, check out the episode page on makeitright.ca for more tips.